How about the Sinites? Interesting bunch of people named after Sin. Now, Father Sin was deified, he was turned into a god, in Mesopotamia and called the Lord of Laws. There's a hymn from the Ur of the Chaldees, which is where Abraham came from. And it says, he, that Sin, who created the law and justice so that mankind has established laws. He was obviously a key person in their understanding of making laws. And his name appears a lot in the king records. You'll find as you look at the list, the name Sin appears. Now, his symbol is the moon. Interesting enough, he was also worshipped in the Sinai area of Arabia. What's fascinating, of course, is Moses actually went up to Mount Sinai and received from God the Ten Commandments, God's laws, which is very interesting. It was almost like saying, okay, you want the real laws? It's not the ancestor who's worshipped. I'm the one who gives you the laws. Quite an interesting slant on that. Now, this is often not so well known, but the founder of China was known in the Chinese history as Father Sin. And in Xiangfu, the first town around about 2600 BC in the Shenxi province. And you can actually trace the name China is derived from Father Sin. And we look at this. The ancient Chinese were called the Sinai, according to the pagan historian Arrian. We learn about the Sin dynasty in the 3rd century BC. Even in modern day usage, the Sino-Japanese War in the Second World War. The ancient Chinese have their own records about Genesis events. We haven't got time to go into those, but they recorded them on pictograms, on ceremonial pots, and this one's a turtle shell. If you want to look more about that, you can go and download my talk called Tracing Genesis in the Ancient Cultures, which we have online. Now let's look at Shem and his descendants. Of course, Shem is the father of the Shemites, or the Semites, which are known today. And according to the Professors Kramer and Arno Pobel, they were very much involved in the early stages of Samaria. And it seems that Samaria is actually a Semitic language, a Semitic name. They branched out into Iraq and Iran in the east and went west into Europe, and especially south into the Arabian Peninsula. Now, Elam, the son of Shem, was one of the best known ones. His descendants were known as the Alamtu by the Babylonians, or they were known as the Alames by the Greeks. They eventually called themselves the Halamati, and later on the Huz, and they were known as Persians. Now, the Elamites, according to Professors Child and Mallowan, two experts, said they were the first founders of Samaria and moved on later on. Of course, the Elamite civilization was dug up. We found that as well. And the picture there on the right-hand side. And they moved from Samaria to Iran, where they became especially based. One of the districts in Iran was known as Pul. We have records of that. And a tribe came out of that called the Puls, or the Palani, which eventually became known as the Palani. And they went westwards with a bunch of other tribes and founded what is now, of course, called Poland. There were other tribes in Iran at the time, the Eberista, and Croatia and Serbia moved westward and founded what we now know as Croatia and Serbia. Now, Asher, that's a very key person, the son of Shem. We learn from Josephus in the 1st century AD. He says that Asher lived at the city of Nineveh and named his subjects the Assyrians. Of course, the Assyrians are very well known in the ancient record. We learn from Micah about 720 BC in the Old Testament, Assyria was the land of Nimrod. And this was a place at the beginning of empires, of a master race. And here we have, they became known as the master race, and Shar-Kishati was a title given to these kings of Assyria. They were the forerunners of the Shahs, or the Tsars, or the Caesars, or the Kaisars. So you can probably see where we're going with this, and how it develops already. Well, Asher, the person mentioned in Genesis, was turned into a god, very common in that time, and so the kings after him. And often their name Asher appears in the lists as part of their title. And they were actually called the Ashurs. But the Hindus did not like them. Simple reason, I think, was Dravidians being dark-skinned were treated very badly, and it seemed the caste system developed out of this Assyrian master race, where the white ones at the top and the dark ones at the bottom. And in the Hindu records, they call the Ashurs the Asuras, the demons. They refer to them. On the other hand, the Persians seem to have got on quite well with the Assyrians, and they called them the Ahuras, which basically meant good spirits. Their view was good spirits rather than demons. This picture of the one you see there on the artwork is actually King Ashur-nasirban. It's typical, as I mentioned, the name Ashur being in his title. Well, here we go. The Assyrians head to Germany. Quite amazing. But 612 BC, the Assyrian Empire was defeated and assimilation occurs. Most of the Assyrians were sort of assimilated into the people round about. But what we do find, we can trace them. Many Assyrians moved to Turkey. We find this from Diodorus Siculus, a pagan historian. And they are known in the Crimea as the Assyriani. Pliny mentions them. And then they become classified amongst these roving hordes, the Scythians, the barbarians up there. They spread into Europe, and the Romans start calling them the Germaanit, the genuine ones. That's really what it means, that the genuine ones. And they are now listed amongst the Galatai, or the Gauls, according to Strabo, a pagan historian. A bit later on, about 400 AD, the whole bunch of people, the Vandals you probably heard about, the Alans, the Saxons, and the Alemanni, they invade Europe. And Jerome mentions about the same time, he says Ashur is also joined with them. He doesn't mean Ashur, the actual person, because he was dead a long time before, but he means the Assyrians, the descendants of Ashur, have joined with them. And so they move into Europe, particularly Germany. And one tribe that comes out of them is the Franks. They move into Germany, and they established, of course, the city of Frankfurt. And France itself comes from the Franki as well. The Franks are the Franki. And there's this moving together into Germany of the Vandals and the Assyrians, as Procopius, the Roman historian, records. 368 AD, the Saxoni and Franki invade Gaul, we find in historical records. And later, of course, Anglo-Saxons invade Britain. They spread through America, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. So that probably incorporates some of us here, find some of our roots. Now, here's another son of Shem, Arphaxad. And Josephus says he was the father of what was known as eventually the Chaldeans. You've probably all heard of the Chaldeans. They were famous as the Magi in Iraq and Iran. They were famous for astronomy, and they were the wise men, even had great influence on kings and decisions made in government. Now, according to the Hurrian culture, in the Nutsi tablets, clay tablets of 1400 BC, there are the people called the Araphura. They are known as Araphu amongst the Akkadians, and Ptolemy refers to them as Arpaksadis. And there was once the population in that area, once called the Kuru Araxes. In fact, there's even a river mentioned named after Araxes. And scholars reckon it's traced back to Arphaxad, the son of Shem. Now, Eber, son of Shem, well, you can look straight away where we're going with that one on the right-hand picture. We'll trace through about the Jewish people. But Eber was the father of the Hebrews. This is a long time, of course, centuries before the Jewish people as such. And some scholars reckon that the Egyptian records, they speak about the Abiru, possibly also a reference to the Hebrews. Abraham, of course, was a descendant of the Hebrews, or of Eber. And Judah was a descendant of Eber and Abraham, and of course was the father of the Jewish people. And that's how you get those. And the Jewish people, of course, spread throughout the world, as we know. Two other sons, two sons of Eber, Peleg and Joktan. Peleg, the Bible says in Genesis 10, in his time the earth was divided. Now, some creationists have said that this would be perhaps after the flood and all the upheaval that took place. It was these dividing of the continents. But the majority of scholars speak about it being a time when the earth was divided as being the tribal groups dispersed. Now, we can actually trace the name Peleg in the language, in the Akkadian, because divided in Akkadian is Puluka, whereas Assyrian, to divide, is Palgu. So you're tracing that back to the original person. And his descendants lived in a place called Paliga on the river Euphrates.